I am going to tell you something about myself that I have not said out loud to many people. For 22 years, I stole from my customers. Not with a gun, not with a knife, although I had plenty of those. I stole with a scale. 50 grams at a time, every transaction, every day, for 22 years. My name is Khalid Mahmoud. I am 54 years old. I came to Canada from Homs in 1998 with my wife Samira, and enough money to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in Mississauga and not much else. By 2001, I had saved enough to take over a halal butcher shop on Hurontario Street from an older Syrian man named Abu Walid, who was retiring. I paid him in installments over 4 years. I worked 6 days a week. I prayed 5 times a day. I fasted every Ramadan. I was, by every external measure, a decent Muslim man building a decent life. And I was a thief. Before you keep reading, leave a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I want to see how far this reaches. Let me explain how the scale worked, because the mechanism matters for understanding what kind of man I was. A digital commercial scale can be calibrated to read slightly above or below the actual weight. The adjustment is small and almost invisible, a matter of a few grams either way. I had mine calibrated so that it read 50 grams higher than the actual weight. When I put 450 grams of lamb on the platform, the display read 500. When I put 950 grams of beef, it read 1,000, 50 grams per sale. 30 to 40 customers a day, 300 days a year. I did this math once around year 10. I stopped doing it after that because the number was too large to sit comfortably with, even for a man who had made peace with what he was doing. The customers trusted me completely. That is the thing I need you to understand. They were not strangers off the street. Many of them had been coming to me for years. They were families from the mosque, from the Syrian community, from the Somali and Pakistani families, who had moved into the neighborhood as it grew. They called me Abu Khalid, a term of respect. They asked my advice about cuts of meat, about how to prepare things, about whether the lamb was fresh this week. They trusted me the way you trust a butcher you have known for a long time, with your eyes open and your guard down. I knew every one of their faces. I knew their children's names. I knew who was having a wedding and who was recovering from surgery, and who had just lost a job and was buying the cheapest cut on the shelf. And I robbed every single one of them, every single time. I was not poor. I want to be clear about that. By the time this story happened, I owned the shop. I owned the building above it. I drove a good car. My daughters had both gone to university in Ontario. I stole not because I needed to, but because I had started before I needed to, and then simply never stopped. It had become the way I ran my business, a habit, infrastructure. I had a philosophy about it that I told myself on the rare occasions when the thought rose up and I had to deal with it. 50 grams is nothing. They do not notice. If they checked every time, they would find out, but they do not check, and that is their choice. I am not forcing anything on anyone. I am providing a service and taking a small commission that no one agreed to, but no one would miss. That is what I told myself. I want to tell you about Rose, because the theology of this story is simple, but the human part is complicated, and you need to know who Rose was before I tell you what Rose did. Rose Tanis was 67 years old when the night I am going to tell you about happened. She was Lebanese-Canadian, Christian, had come to Canada in the 1980s with her husband Anton, who had worked as a machinist at a factory in Brampton for 23 years before a heart attack took him at 61. She lived alone in a small house about 3 blocks from my shop. She had been a customer of mine for 12 years, since I was still paying off Abu Walid. She came in every Friday morning with a small paper list written in Arabic, old-fashioned Lebanese script from the Beirut she had grown up in, and she bought what her family needed for the week. She was not a comfortable woman in the way of people who have been comfortable their whole lives. She was comfortable in the way of someone who has learned to be content with what is available and to be grateful for it specifically. She knew every price in my shop, and she bought deliberately, item by item, according to what she needed and what she could afford. She never asked me to knock anything down or give her a deal. She paid what was on the tag, thanked me, and left. Her daughter Christina lived in Oakville with her husband and their 2 children. Rose's grandson Danny was 8 years old and had a blood disorder that the doctor had told them required consistent good nutrition. High-quality protein, 3 times a week, reliably. Rose was the one who made sure of it. She bought lamb shoulder every Friday. The good cuts, not the cheap ones. The ones that would make a proper stock and have enough fat to be worth cooking slowly. She had told me about Danny the first time she bought the lamb, and then mentioned him from time to time over the years. She was the kind of grandmother who talked about her grandchildren, the way other people talk about things they're proud of, which is to say constantly and without any self-consciousness about it. I knew about Danny. I knew about the blood disorder. I knew Rose was buying that lamb specifically for his diet, that she tracked what she spent on it, that she sometimes bought a little less of something else so she could afford the lamb. I knew all of this. I stole from her every Friday anyway. Rose was the kind of woman who prayed out loud without embarrassment. Not loudly. She was not a performance person. But if she was waiting for me to finish a cut, she would close her eyes for a moment, and her lips would move, barely audible, and then she would open her eyes and continue the conversation exactly where she had left it. I had watched her do this dozens of times over 12 years. I assumed she was praying for the food, for the meal, the kind of blessing that Lebanese Christian women of her generation said before and after everything. The kind of faith that is so habitual it happens between sentences. I had no idea she was praying for me. I had no idea that every night, before she slept, she said my name to God and asked Him to keep me honest and bless my family. I had no idea she had been doing this for 11 years. I had no idea she thought of me as someone worth praying for. If I had known, I am not sure it would have changed anything. That is the kind of man I was. Leave a comment with the word scale. Just that word. Because what happened next is about a weight being measured that I had no idea was being measured. The night everything changed was a Thursday in November, late fall. I had just counted the day's receipts, one of those good days, 43 customers, clean transactions, nothing unusual. I was locking up. The shop was dark except for the display case lights I always left on for the sidewalk. I had my coat on and my bag in my hand. 3 knocks on the glass door. I looked up. A man was standing outside. He was wearing a plain, dark jacket and he was looking at me through the glass with an expression I could not immediately categorize. Not threatening, not impatient, just very steady. I should have ignored him. The sign said closed. It was past 9. I was tired. But something about the way he was standing made me walk to the door. I opened it a few inches. He said, "Good evening, Khalid." The use of my name stopped me. I did not recognize him. He was maybe 40, medium height, with the kind of face that is difficult to place. Not Syrian, not Lebanese, not Pakistani. His eyes were dark and calm and seemed to have more room in them than a person's eyes usually have. I said, "We are closed." He said, "I know. I am not here for meat." I said, "Then what do you want?" He said, "I want to talk to you about the scale." The cold air came in through the gap in the door, and I stood there holding it, and I felt something happen in my chest. Not quite fear. Something more like the very specific feeling of a secret that has been held a long time, suddenly understanding that it will not be held anymore. I let him in. He walked to the center of the shop and stood near the display case. I stayed by the door. We looked at each other for a moment. He had the patience of someone who is not in a hurry. He said, 50 grams, every sale, every day, for 22 years. I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Someone who has been in this shop for a long time." My mind was going through categories. Government inspector, fraud investigator, someone hired by a competitor or a customer who suspected. I said, "You are from Weights and Measures." He said no. I said, "Then who sent you?" He said, "A woman named Rose has been praying for you every night for 11 years, by name. She thanks God for having an honest butcher who takes care of the families in this neighborhood." She prays that God blesses you and your family. She prays this every night before she sleeps. I want to tell you what that sentence did to me when it arrived. I had been braced for accusation. I had been braced for the word fraud, and the word authorities, and the word evidence. I had not been braced for the word prayer and for my own name inside it. The sentence landed in a completely different part of me than I was prepared to receive anything. I said nothing. He said, "She was praying for you this morning, while you were weighing her lamb." The lamb. I had sold Rose lamb that morning. She had come in a day early because Christina's family was coming for dinner Thursday instead of Friday. I had sold her what she thought was 800 grams. I had given her 750. I put my hand on the display case. He said, "She calls you by name." She says, "Lord, bless Khalid and his family. Keep his business honest and good. He has served this community faithfully." I heard those words in the empty shop at 9 in the evening, and I felt something I had not felt since I was very young. Genuine shame. Not the protective kind. Not the tactical kind that comes from being caught and calculating consequences. The other kind. The kind that comes from understanding, suddenly and completely, what you actually are. I sat down on the stool behind the counter. I said, "She doesn't know." He said, "No, she trusts you completely. She has trusted you for 11 years while you were stealing from her every week." I put my head in my hands. He said, "I want to tell you what those 50 grams added up to, over 11 years of Friday mornings." I said I did not want to hear it. He said, "I am going to tell you anyway, not as a number, as what it actually was." He said, "Danny needed the good lamb." The doctor told Rose that high-quality protein 3 times a week consistently was important for managing his condition. Rose bought what she thought was 800 grams each Friday. She received 750. She did not know this. So she did what she could with what she had. She stretched the portions. She ate less herself on the days she served the lamb so that Danny could have more. Some weeks, when the grocery budget ran close, she skipped a week of lamb entirely because she thought the previous portions had been adequate. He stopped. He said, "She ate less, so that Danny could have more of what she thought he was getting. And he still did not get the full amount." The silence in the shop was very complete. He said, "That is what 50 grams means, Khalid, when it is taken from someone who is already giving everything she has. I am going to tell you what I am not claiming here because I think it matters. I am not claiming I caused Danny's illness. I am not claiming his blood disorder was my fault. I am saying that for 11 years, a woman who was sacrificing to feed her sick grandson was being robbed every single Friday by a man she was praying for by name. That is the precise situation. That is what I was." I looked up at him. I said, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Nothing. I came because she prayed. And because there is still time." I said, "Time for what?" He said, "To become someone worth the prayer." He walked toward the counter. When he got close, I could see his hands in the display case light. There were scars on his wrists, old ones, pale and smooth against his skin. I looked at them, and I looked up, and he was watching me look, and he did not explain them or hide them. He said, "There are scales that weigh things you cannot see." I have known every transaction in this shop for 22 years, every gram, every face. I know Rose's prayer, and I know what you told yourself so you could sleep, and I am here tonight because neither of those things is the whole truth about you. I said, "What is the whole truth about me?" He said, "That you have always known this was wrong. From the first day. You knew and you did it anyway, and then you built a system of thought around it to make it livable. That is the truth. And the other truth, the one you maybe do not know yet, is that knowing it does not have to be where this ends." He sat down on one of the stools near the counter and we talked for a long time after that. He told me about people I had stolen from over 22 years, one by one, with specific detail. Mr. Karimi, who sent money to family in Tehran and came in every second week for whatever was cheapest and would last. Mrs. Adiola, who worked 2 jobs and came in on Saturday mornings between her overnight shift ending and her second job beginning. The Malik family, 6 children who bought in bulk and always asked if I had offcuts for stock. He described them the way a person describes people they actually know. Not statistics, people. He was not trying to make me feel worse than I already did. He was making sure I could not tell myself it was abstract. About an hour in, I asked him again who he was. He said, "I think you know." I said, "I am Muslim. I have prayed 5 times a day my whole life. I have fasted. I have been to Hajj. I have lived as a faithful man according to what I was given." He said, "I know all of that about you." I said, "Then you know I cannot simply..." He said, "I am not asking you to simply anything. I am asking what you felt tonight, in this room, right now. Not what you were taught to feel, what you feel." I did not have an answer that protected me, so I stopped trying to give one. He stayed for another hour. We talked, or he talked, and I listened, which I think was what I needed. He told me about people I had stolen from whose names I knew. Mr. Karimi, who sent money to family in Tehran and bought the cheapest cut every week without fail. Mrs. Adeola, the Nigerian woman who worked 2 jobs and came in on Saturday mornings before her second shift. The Malik family with 6 children who bought in bulk every 2 weeks and always asked if I had any offcuts they could use for stock. He did not say these things cruelly. He said them the way a person says something that matters to them, with care, with specific detail, with the attention of someone who had actually been paying attention. At some point I asked him again who he was. He said, "I think you know." I said, "I am Muslim. I have been Muslim my whole life. I pray 5 times a day. I fast. I have been to Hajj. I believe in the one God and in the Prophet, peace be upon him." He said, "I know all of that." I said, "Then you know I cannot." He said, "I know what you believe. I am asking what you have felt. Tonight, in this room, right now." And I stopped arguing. Because what I had felt in that hour in the dark of my shop was something I had been looking for my whole life and had not found in any of the places I had been taught to look. I want to say something carefully here, because I have a lot of respect for my own tradition, and I am not interested in being contemptuous about something that shaped 50 years of my life. I was a sincere Muslim. I prayed with intention. I fasted seriously. When I stood on the plain of Arafat during Hajj with 2 million other people, all in white, all oriented toward the same thing, that was genuinely meaningful. I am not dismissing any of it. But there was something I had been looking for inside Islam that Islam kept pointing toward without providing. The sense of being individually known. The sense that the infinite thing I was praying toward actually had my name and could account for my specific history, my specific failures, my specific face. The prayers I said 5 times a day were real prayers, and I meant them. But they always left me with the same feeling I had carried in, like I had performed a correct action, like I had met an obligation, not like I had been seen. What I felt in that shop was different. He knew my name the way Rose knew my name in her prayers, specifically as a particular person with a particular history. He knew every transaction, which is the same as knowing every moment I had chosen to do something wrong and done it anyway, and he was still here, still in my shop, still talking to me, still offering something. That is not what I had been taught to expect from judgment. I had been taught that judgment is accounting. You present your deeds, and they are weighed, the good against the bad, and the result determines what comes next. I had always assumed my account was roughly acceptable. I prayed, I fasted, I gave zakah, I made hajj. Surely the ledger was more or less in order, even with the 50 grams. That night I understood what 50 grams actually means in a ledger that sees everything, not 50 grams. 22 years of daily choices to take from people who trusted me. Thousands of individual moments of deciding that my comfort was more important than their portion. The accounting that I had assumed was roughly fine was not fine, and I had known this all along. The math I had done in year 10 and then refused to repeat. I had refused to repeat it because I knew what it said. He had not come to add up my ledger and present the total. He had come to tell me the ledger is real and the total is real, and then ask what I wanted to do about it. What I felt was known, completely, with full information, including the worst parts. Known and not left. Known and offered something I had not earned and could not earn. He left without ceremony. He walked to the door, opened it, walked out. I did not go after him. I sat in my shop for 2 more hours. On the stool behind the counter, in the dark with the display case lights on and Hurontario Street quiet outside. I want to tell you what I did not do that night. I did not perform wudu and pray Isha. I had been doing that my whole life, and I knew exactly what it felt like. And what I had felt in the shop with that man was not what that felt like. I had been a faithful Muslim for 50 years, and I knew the interior of that practice from the inside. What I felt in that shop was something I did not have a category for. I sat for a long time with that. Then I said out loud, to whoever was in the room with me, in Arabic, because that is the language of my prayers and the language of my most serious thoughts. If you are who I think you are, if the man who walked out of here is who I think he is, I have been looking for this my whole life and did not know what I was looking for. I am asking you now, whatever this costs. I want it. I did not have the theology yet. I did not know the Christian prayer. I did not know the formula. I just said what was true in the language I had. I locked up at midnight and drove home. The next morning was Friday. Leave a comment with the word found. Because what happened the next morning is why I am telling you this story. Rose came in at 9:30 as usual. I want to tell you what it was like to watch her come through the door that morning. She came in the way she always came in, with her coat buttoned to the neck against the November cold, and her paper list folded in her hand, and the specific unhurried movement of a woman who has done this particular errand many times. She said good morning to me and asked how Samira was and how the girls were doing, and whether I had heard that the Aziz family 3 streets over had welcomed a new grandson. I said yes, and answered her questions, and all the while I was watching her hands, her ordinary, careful hands, and thinking about the 11 years of prayers those hands had folded together before she slept. She unfolded her list. She said, 750 grams of lamb shoulder, please. I cut the shoulder, and I put it on the scale, and I put 850 grams on the platform. More than she had asked for, more than she expected. She looked at the display. She said, Khalid, that is too much. I asked for 750. I said, Rose, I need to tell you something. She waited. She had the patience of someone who has learned to wait for things. I said, I have not been honest with you. For a long time. The scale in this shop was not reading correctly. It was reading more than what I was actually giving. I have been underweighting your orders for years, and everyone else's orders, but I am telling you because I owe you this conversation specifically. She was very still. I said, what you bought last Friday was not 800 grams. It was 750. I gave you the reading that said 800. Every Friday for 11 years this has been happening. She looked at the counter between us. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I know. I said, you knew? She said, not exactly. I weighed the meat at home sometimes when the stock did not stretch the way I expected. I thought I was miscounting. I told myself I must have used more than I remembered. She stopped. I never wanted to believe you were doing it on purpose. She looked up at me. She said, so you were. I said, yes. She was quiet again. Not angry. I want to tell you that. Not the quiet of someone preparing an accusation. The quiet of someone absorbing something difficult with the habits of a person who has absorbed difficult things before. Then she said, "Why are you telling me now?" I said, "Because a man came to my shop last night after I closed. He told me about your prayers." Rose went very still in the way people go still when something they thought was private turns out to have been heard. I said, "He told me you pray for me by name, every night, that you thank God for having an honest butcher." She looked at me and her eyes filled. She did not apologize for the tears. She just let them be there. She said, "I do. I have for years. I pray for all my neighbors. But I have always prayed for you specifically because I have always felt that you were carrying something. I did not know what it was. I just knew there was something heavy. So I prayed. I said, it was heard." She said, "Khalid, what happened to you last night?" I said, "I do not know exactly how to explain it, but I think I met the one you prayed to." She put both hands flat on the counter, and she looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Are you all right?" I said, "For the first time in a very long time, I think so." She stood there looking at me with her eyes still full, and then she did something unexpected. She reached across the counter and put her hand over mine, and she said very quietly, in Lebanese Arabic, which was close enough to my Syrian that I understood every word, "I prayed for this too. I did not know what I was praying for, but I prayed for whatever you needed." I stood in my shop and I wept, in front of a 67-year-old Lebanese Canadian woman who I had been robbing for 11 years. I stood there and I cried, and she kept her hand over mine until I was done. Then she straightened up and said, "Now, tell me what I actually owe you for 850 grams of lamb shoulder." And I said, "Nothing. Not today. Not for a long time. And we will talk about why another day." She nodded once, in that way she had, and she took her lamb and she went home. I want to tell you what the next months looked like, because I know how these stories can sound, as though one night changes everything instantly and the difficulty disappears. That is not how it went. I called the calibration company on Saturday morning and described what I needed as an emergency service call. The technician came Monday morning. He ran his tests, found the adjustment, and noted in his report that the scale had been deliberately miscalibrated by approximately 50 grams in favor of the seller. I told him it had been an error that had gone undetected for some time. He looked at me with the look of a man who has seen something like this before and who has learned that certain conversations are not his job. He signed his report, calibrated the scale correctly, and charged me for the service call plus $50 extra for the urgency, which was more than fair. Then I sat down with my accountant. That meeting was difficult in the particular way of meetings where the numbers say something about you that you have to sit with. We could not know the exact figure. 22 years of records were not all available, and customer purchases varied. We worked out a conservative estimate. It was a number large enough to require planning. I will not tell you the exact amount. I will tell you that I spent the next 3 years, specifically and systematically, trying to correct it. Lower prices for regular customers, announced as a loyalty program. Donations to the food bank that serves the Mississauga Muslim community. A program I started where every month I gave a free meat parcel to 3 families the mosque identified as being in financial difficulty. Rose got lamb for free every Friday for 2 years until she told me clearly, with the directness of a Lebanese woman who knows when enough has been done, that I was to stop and let it be finished. I told Samira on the second night. I had spent the first night after Rose's visit, not sleeping, lying in the dark beside my wife of 26 years, going over how to begin. There is no good beginning for a conversation like that. I chose honesty, without preamble. I said, "I have something to tell you. I have been running the shop dishonestly for the whole time we have had it." She sat up in bed. She looked at me. I told her everything. The calibration, the math, the 22 years, the specific customers I had robbed, including Rose, whose lamb she had eaten in our house on feast days. I told her about the visitor, about what he had said, about what I had felt. I told her about Rose's prayers and what it had meant to hear them described by someone who should not have known about them. Samira cried. Not from anger, or not primarily. She cried from something older and more complete than anger. She cried because we had built our life on something wrong and she had not known it, and now she knew it, and the knowing changed the texture of 22 years of memory. She stayed. The morning after I told her, she said, "I do not understand everything you are describing about that night, but I know who you have been since then, and that person is my husband, so I am staying." That was enough. That was everything. I am still Muslim by birth and by culture. My family is Muslim. My community is Muslim. But I am not the same man who stood in that shop and told himself 50 grams is nothing. And when I am alone and I pray now, I do not pray in the language I was taught. I pray in the language of that night. Direct. Honest. To the man who came to my shop and knew everything about me and offered me something anyway. I still do not have all the theology worked out. I am 54 years old, and I am learning things I should have learned long ago. But I know what I felt. And I know that what I felt was real. Rose's grandson Danny is 12 now. He is doing well. His blood counts have been stable for 2 years. Every Friday morning Rose still comes in with her paper list, and I give her the best cut I have at the best price I can. And sometimes she prays quietly while she waits, a short murmur under her breath. And I know she is still praying for me, and I am grateful in a way I do not have words for that she did not stop. To anyone watching this who is running a business, a scale, an account, a system that is just a little off in your favor, I am not going to tell you that you will have a visitor the way I did. I do not know how any of this works. I just know how it worked for me. I know that a woman who had every reason not to trust me, trusted me anyway, and prayed for me anyway, and that her prayers reached somewhere I had not been reaching myself. I know that when someone saw me completely, with all the information, the 50 grams and the 22 years and the rationalizations and the self-serving arithmetic, when someone saw all of that and still came, and still offered something, that is what changed me. Not guilt, not consequences, not getting caught, being seen, being offered something real in return for nothing. That is the only thing that has ever actually changed a person, in my experience. Write the word scale in the comments. Let me see where this reaches today. May Jesus walk with you today, and in every day that is still ahead of you. Amen.